Sorry, I'm not a drummer. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to have you here, even though it's still sunny. I heard the Finnish summer is gonna end really soon, so I think it's good that you're here. We are flattered. So, welcome. I'm Jonne Harja. I'm the IGDA Finland Helsinki Hub's lead coordinator, and I'm just gonna say a few welcoming words. So, first of all, thank you to our awesome sponsor tonight, AppsFlyer and Armada Interactive. So let's give them a hand at this point. I know we're gonna have a really interesting seminar here, but first, few words about tonight. So, after the seminar part, we're gonna have a Finnish Game Jam Award winners. Two of them, their games are playable there on the other side of this. And there's also one extra. We did this stunt called Jam Bike. Some of you might have heard of it. So the Jam bike is there to see, and the game is there playable after we set it up before this seminar ends. So you can check that one out and ask me about Jam Bike. And then the usual one, I need you to take off your phones. We're gonna have the chant of the IGDA Finland. I mean, it's important that you really take your phones and put off your wireless network. Just go here and put it off, because our mic system is really fancy and expensive, but it gets really, really distracted like a dog if there's too many mobile devices trying to connect the wireless networks here. So this really works. We have tried this many times. And further ado, let's start the awesome seminar. So I'm gonna introduce you Janos. I'm gonna do it like a professional, reading it from the paper. So Janos Perei is a seasoned digital marketer with core focus on advertising technologies and media management. Held various positions in the marketing and advertising companies with key emphasis on setting up, managing and optimizing performance-based marketing activities, leveraging online and mobile media outlets. Wow, I show you I can almost read English from paper. So, Perez, please, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I could maybe summarize it up a little bit shorter. So I'm the boring marketer who does all the numbers, the marketing controlling, and these kind of items. But I guess that's also needed to run efficient and good marketing operations. On behalf of AppsFlyer and Armada Interactive, I would also like to welcome everybody to this gathering here today, especially also the streamers who are watching us live now. And we hope that we have compiled a relatively good agenda for you for the seminar, lots of actionable insights. And let's just dive in. We will have Jonathan from AppsFlyer, who will be briefly talking about the strategy games data benchmarks for Q1, so really the latest of the marketing intelligence. Then I'll briefly walk you through how we prepared actually for our soft launch from a marketing and business perspective. And last but not least, our technical director, Nick, will make a kick-ass presentation about how you build a really awesome game. So without further ado, I would like to invite Jonathan to the stage for the presentation of the Q1 strategy benchmarks.
Hey guys, great to be here. My name is Jonathan Bregman. I lead AppsFlyer's Nordic activity. For those of you who don't know, AppsFlyer is a mobile attribution solution. We practically enable gaming advertisers understand from which marketing campaign is ROI positive. Okay. So today's presentation is about strategy games. This is a presentation that practically and hopefully will enable you understand whether you should continue with a project or delete it. I will show you some average retention rates after 1 day, 7 days, 30 days, and some other actionable data that we collected on AppsFlyer. So the first thing that I want to talk about is practically the fact that on AppsFlyer, we see that the subcategory of strategy games is something that is completely booming at the moment. It's not something that is new to you guys, obviously. Most of you guys have strategy games. And this is something that we see not only in terms of organic activity, but also in terms of non-organic activity. Now, the major thing, which leads me to the second point, the major thing that we see here is that retention is becoming more and more important, right? So if in the past, gaming studios that were interested in running marketing campaigns were just interested in generating the install, now we're talking about deeper funnel analytics of really getting these users that eventually use the app also after 30 days, for example, or any other metric that you can think about. Another metric that we will talk today is the fact that on Android, and this will surprise many of you, there are much more in-app events that occur compared to iOS. Nevertheless, like you assume, on iOS, purchase events are much higher than on Android, and we will back this up with data. Another interesting factor that some of you might take after this presentation is that only 1 in 5 users will eventually purchase a good from your app, which is something that is quite interesting to know. And the last pointer is that currently Google and Facebook obviously are the major go-to places to acquire new users, and we definitely see that the video networks are also starting to rise in terms of retention and also in scale. So what I see here in this slide is practically that relatively the number of strategy games in the subcategory of games, the number of strategy games is quite and relatively low compared to the distribution of number of non-organic installs. What this means to me is that less and less strategy games advertisers are running user acquisition, but those who do, they really pound it hard. So if you're a gaming advertiser and you're really indie at the moment and you're planning to go on the strategy genre, I guess this is something that is quite interesting to see because this is backed up with data. On the contrary, if you're a big publisher, there are a lot of big gaming publishers that are focused on strategy from Finland, Supercell, Rovio, not Rovio, Supercell, for example. This is good news for you. So a little bit about the methodology regarding the retention. We covered the second half of 2016 in North America, covered 20 million installs with over 9 million app opens with 250 apps that had more than 1,000 installs. Now, as you can see here, the first thing that I see that is organic is still supreme. Organic, by all means, it still has much higher retention rates, also after 1 day, after 7 days, after 30 days. And ultimately, you cannot really handle the amount of organic traffic you have, but definitely you could see that the metrics for organic users are much higher compared to non-organic users. Now, when you look at the difference between Android users and iOS users, you can see also a very large distinction. iOS users have, through day 1, day 7, and day 30, much higher retention rate compared to Android users. Now, another interesting factor that I see here, have a look at day 30 across all the metrics. The highest metric will be 4.5. This is something that I think it's very valuable because I met a few gaming advertisers just in the last few days, and they told me, hey, we're soft launching. Our current average retention rate after 30 days is around 6%. What should I do? Should I continue the project? Should I delete it? And here it's, as you can see, it's a quite substantial data study. Shows that perhaps they shouldn't kill the project. So these are interesting metrics to think about. Also, you could see the difference between Android and iOS compared to organic. So you could see that on day 30, on Android, there's 1.7% versus 4.5. and on iOS is 2.8 compared to 4.5. Maybe in the nominal value it's not so much, but when you multiply that by a lot of users, it could be very substantial. Now, install to lifetime engagement. I will run quickly through the methodology. Q1 2017 with 40 million in-app events measured with 150 apps. And here again, you see very interesting, and for me it was very surprising information. So first of all, you could see that Android users are more active than iOS users. So one install generated 22 events on Android versus only 14 on iOS. Now, when we're talking about purchase events, the table completely moves upside down, and iOS is almost 2 times, the average user purchases almost 2 times more than Android. Now, if you look at the numbers in general, you could see that on average, 1 in 5 customers will make a purchase event in your app. I believe that for many of you, this is very important information. Yet again, have a look also at the difference between organic and non-organic. We're talking almost about 2.5 multiplier for the organic. So although marketing is great, and although I guess some of you are doing it, obviously organic is still what you should strive for. Now, average revenue per user. The next slide is covered the Q1 in North America with 2 million downloads. Now, in general, the next slide is about in-app purchases. With AppsFlyer, you can also track average revenue per user, but that's aside. On the next slide, it's only regarding average revenue per user. And I think this is the best slide of all, because this is if you're now a gaming company that thinks whether I should continue, how am I benchmarked versus other people? I think this has very valuable data. So the first thing I see is that in terms of overall average revenue per user, the average organic user has almost 3 times the amount of dollars. He pays almost 3 times the amount compared to non-organic install, which emphasizes what we talked before. When we're talking about Android versus iOS, have a look 1 second at the iOS non-organic. It's 4.9 compared to the Android organic 3.8. So although across the board organic is much stronger than non-organic, you could see that regardless, iOS is way, way stronger than Android in that sense. Also, when you're talking about multipliers, so in the multiplier on Android, non-organic versus organic, it's almost 4. When we're talking about iOS, is less than 2. And also the nominal values here really fluctuate. So you could see that the overall is closer to Android, while on iOS is almost $6. So that was all from my side. Hopefully it was some interesting data points. And if someone has a question, I'll be more than happy to answer. Yeah.
I don't need a mic, I'm very loud.
Okay.
You mentioned that there is more purchases coming from iOS users than Android users. Is this Europe region? Because in US region, there's been a recent development that Android users actually buy more, they just faster. But that's US only.
This data study is about US. We had a European data study. It didn't really fluctuate that much. We still see the purchases, the value of each purchase is much higher on iOS. Also, just think about the concept. On iOS, most of the people enter their credit card information, and they're already eligible to acquire from the get-go. That's a little different compared to Android. So yeah, definitely, and also data backs it up, that in terms of iOS versus Android, obviously CPIs are higher, but also the average revenue per user is higher. Again, this information is only about in-app purchases. Monetization is a whole different world.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Cool. Yep.
So are these numbers before platform cuts or after?
This is before.
Okay, thanks.
So the question was if it's before platform cuts or after. On iOS, the platform cut is around 30%. Yeah.
Can you please tell me that if you have some nominal values for non-organic traffics, because at least from our experience, then of course the performance of IS of non-organic is good, but the traffic is way less than on Android. Like getting some organic traffic, there is without features is basically very hard and much lower than in Android. So if you can like compare, or if you have some data with also like the actual values, so we can see
actual values of what? Sorry.
like how many organic installs, for example, have you noticed in US on iOS compared to how many organic installs you notice on Android, or if you have this kind of data?
Yeah, we don't have it here, but I think the major thing here is, as you mentioned, you cannot control organic traffic. Non-organic traffic you can control with your budget, but the general terms I don't want to throw it out just here. I'll be happy to talk with you about it later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Alrighty. So on to the next presentation, where I'll be really briefly talking to you about our road to the soft launch. In this presentation, I would like to talk about two main items. The first one being a little bit more the data-driven, the marketing approach, trying to reduce and mitigate risk that will hopefully make the chance of success of your game on the market higher. And then after that, we'll deep a little bit more in towards a more pleasurable idea of visual branding to see how we actually develop the visual branding strategy behind Quantum Siege. And last but not least, of course, summarizing up a couple of learning activities that we have done. So what are the common ideas that you guys could be avoiding potentially as a caveat? So starting out with these preparations. So first and foremost, of course, what is the primary objective? Why is it worthwhile to essentially spend money into market research? The first obvious answer is, of course, mitigating risk. By far, it is not possible, of course, to ask every single user or every single prospective user within your audience base. Having said that, it could be very beneficial to start and trying to get some sort of a directional information about how people perceive the prospective product. Second point, of course, is always collecting feedback for development. So by testing, for instance, certain characters against one another, you will be able to see what kind of visual preferences your target segment, your target audience has. And last but not least, of course, you will also understand what are your most valuable segments. So especially if you're testing against multiple different type of audiences, you will de facto be able to learn about how they perform and how much interest they generate towards your game. So how do we do it? Of course, the first is relatively straightforward, desktop research. Just plain and simple, Google certain industry trends like the ones that we have just heard from AppsFlyer, try to figure out certain benchmark data, and then see how your product performs against it. Here, I guess many of you have been using Facebook. There is a really good tool that Facebook provides pretty much free of charge to every single advertiser, which is called the Facebook Audience Insights. Normally, the way we would use this tool is just to plot some competitor data of our closest competitors and then try to read out the demographic profile. I'll be able to show you a concrete example in a moment. And then after that, we could move to a little bit more elaborate market research practices, starting with simple A/B tests using, for instance, a tool like PickFu, all the way to more robust surveying and polling systems like playtest cloud surveys. And last but not least, of course, you can go all the way to, for instance, a full-blown market research like an established company like Nielsen, for instance. At this point, usually I get the question, okay, this is all really nice, but who the heck will be able to afford Nielsen for market research? Well, the good news is that actually some of these budget tools have been more or less getting closer and closer to the reach. I think those companies have realized that there's a genuine market reach of small to medium-sized companies that would be interested in leveraging. So I can tell you that an average research we would be conducted could already be started from a budget of, for instance, $1,000. So that's, in relative terms, in terms of market research, is a relatively affordable price point. So let's see an actual process. So how did we essentially conduct this step by step? As mentioned, we actually started out with the competitor audience profiling. So we went to Facebook Audience Insights, pick the main markets, the dominant Western markets, the dominant Asian markets. We plot it in our closest competitors and then just simply try to read out, okay, how does that audience look? Of course, the general demographic details, let's say age, gender, is generally interesting. I think where the additional data lies, which could be really interesting to us prospectively, is more when you get into data points like, the page likes, categories, what kind of brands people are after. And based on that, you can build essentially an image, a persona. Okay, how does our player base will be looking prospectively? So once we have this basic information, then of course the next step is trying to see, okay, we know that this would be our audience. How do we position? How do we sell the game to these guys? At that point, we usually split up the research into two. First, an internal positioning survey, so see how we inside the company see the game. What are the key values, the key marries, the key features, and correspondingly map it against an external system, an external set of researches and customer profiles, and see how we can merge all these two together. To give you a concrete example, here you could still see our working title, Time Stage. This was the final positioning statement and the final positioning work that we came up for our game, Quantum Siege. Here, we essentially made a strong statement, what the game will be about, then also saying how will we be able to differentiate ourselves against our competitors, and last but not least, what will be essentially the key offering that will make our game distinct in the market. Once this one is completed, the final step would be, of course, getting the brand together. First, a little bit, of course, finding the brand name. A couple of times, I guess, if you guys have been trying to name a product, you've been encountering the difficulty that either the social media account is there, or somebody holds a trademark already in the field, or you can't register the domain, or. So there are a lot of different kind of angles that you need to consider whenever getting towards the brand name. Second part would be a little bit about the concept. So really trying to see, okay, getting a general mood of the features, a general description of the game storyline, and see how do players react to it. And then, last but not least, of course, testing some of the visual items. Let me give you a concrete example of each of these. So, apologies. So first starting out with the name. We have used Nielsen's concept naming testing product. Essentially, we came up with a short list of 6 names that we felt to be a good enough name for our product, and then asked them to benchmark it against their panel. This panel then took first the unnamed concept and see how well it performs, and then took the individual concepts with the different brand names and trying to measure out, okay, how successful the game is likely to be. Here, I highlighted 2 of the key items that we, of course, usually consider in terms of marketing. First is the download interest, so how likely are people to download the game? And of course, the second point is the urgency, how quick they want to try the game, how quick they would like to download it. And based on that, of course, we came close that there are 2 relatively close competitors. Having said that, we internally and also through the research have been confirmed that Quantum Siege as such looks to be a good one. Then we have tested each of our hero characters in the game against one another in terms of visual appeal, where we have asked essentially a survey panel from Playtest Cloud, from United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Okay, based on the visual representation of the game, how do you feel about the individual characters? Then they were able to rank the individual characters by different kind of attributes. And net, we were able to come up with the idea that, okay, the Wanderer character that we will be showing to you a little bit later today was de facto the strongest of all. And then the rest we will be able to prioritize in terms of communications and packaging. Last but not least, of course, I don't need to highlight the pivotal importance of a good app icon. And what we did then essentially sketched up a different categories of app icons that we felt to be good and representative of the game. And then just simply through a quick A/B test polling system, named Plikfu, tested each of them against one another and came up that, okay, the rendered gate item is the one that seems to be generating the most interest. So that's it for this side of the story. This is kind of the robust market research, but of course, all this market research, all this data is really valuable, but more or less useless in case you cannot really formulate things into a nice visual branding strategy. In this process, we have actually leveraged the help of an external agency, the Pilot Studios from the US, and they were the ones who helped us through the different steps of this process, starting out with the logo. So how would this normally look? Of course, we will start doing some research and some ideation on the emblem, and then the name itself in terms of how would the custom typography look. To give you an example, this was essentially kind of the end of the production. So we tried to iterate on a number of different views, number of different fonts and types, and how all this add together until we essentially find the final icon. Of course, once we have this, it is also critically important to have a really good corporate font that could be consistently used throughout the game, throughout the communications materials. And once we have identified the basic look and feel of the logo, kind of the key emblem, the signet, then of course we can have a look how would the different kind of font types be looking. And at this moment, if I'm not mistaken, we are actually testing out the option A. And net, that will be the one that will be, again, helping us to create a brand, create a visual brand that is consistent time after time. Last but not least, visual aids. I guess pretty much everybody is familiar with the storefronts. In the storefronts, of course, we do have to use a lot of screenshots to keep people's attention. And again, we did some kind of exploration around what kind of ideas we could leverage and we can use, and also try to sketch them up. How would that actually match against the actual game screenshots? And then at the end of the day, we essentially picked the one that we felt to be the strongest in terms of both the branding concept and also helping us to correctly communicate a visual entity, a visual unity across the different touch points. Now to the key art. The key art is, of course, a really interesting point. The key art will be the art piece that will be, I would say, kind of the landmark point that will be giving you essentially the visual fidelity and showing you the most kind of a moment from the game. So here we work with a number of inspirations and moods and also a couple of creative explorations. To give you a quick idea, again, with the help of Pilot Studios, we try to sketch up a number of different concepts. And then at the end of the day, we came up with 2 concepts that we felt extremely strong about. And net, of course, after this point has come, we made our choice. Just out of curiosity, who one would vote for the top one? Hands up. Not that many? Okay. Who would vote for number 2? Okay, a little more, yes. The action shot is always a little bit better. Having said that, please do remember that, again, this is a piece of marketing art. So from a marketing art perspective, we do need to make sure to have enough mileage from the assets. Though that specific image is very action-packed, unfortunately, the reusing certain characters and elements of the image is not something that you would be able to consistently use, again, to build a visual unity, a visual brand. And that's for that reason, we actually net decided to go with the final art, with the final sketch. At this moment, we are working on essentially the full detailed process when this whole image will be repainted. But that was more or less the steps we took step by step to coming up with a key art that would then, in turn, hopefully work the best for our game. So to sum up a little bit the 2 sides that I have just mentioned, with respect to market research, the first important point and learning that you guys need to understand, this is always directional and not divine. So whatever market research we get, unless you really deck a substantial amount of money and investment against these market researches, you simply will not be able to realize return on investment. So whatever information you get should be helping you to guide, but it's never a decisive factor, should not be. Research design is paramount. I think it's relatively straightforward. The better questions you ask, the better answers you will be able to receive for them. And therefore, it is indeed worthwhile to spend some extra time on really polishing and really making sure that the questions you are asking are the right ones. And last but not least, of course, with every single process, you always should be adapting and iterating. So as we were conducting the different A/B tests one after the other, we made some smaller learnings, in terms of the audience composition, the sample sizing. Make sure that you incorporate those learnings and make it to the best of your product. Then onto the visual branding side. So first and foremost, very important, do your homework. We did find it extremely useful that we had quite a substantive market research in terms of desktop research and trying to check competitors, competing different kind of titles in the same theme and area, and really trying to come up with an idea, okay, what would be more or less this visual identity that we are after. Second part, very critical, get the art and the marketing team on the same ground. We did have made the actual experience that in certain cases, either the art team or the marketing team took a little bit kind of a stronger foot. Having said that, whenever we were always working together on the same ground, we essentially been able to achieve the best results. And last but not least, in the case when you would be working with an agency, like we did, of course, manage the agency risks is always an important point, because whenever you are working with agencies, sometimes you do need to make sure that you keep essentially your finger on the heartbeat of the projects. Otherwise, certain deadlines aren't quite working out. Without further ado, this would have been kind of the short overview. If you guys would be interested in receiving some of the slides, feel free to drop me a quick email. I would be happy to follow up on that. And at this moment, I would be happy to take any questions from the audience, should there be any. Okay. Any questions? Okay. If there are no questions, then I would like to thank you, and I would like to welcome our technical director, Nick, onto the stage, who will be talking about the making of Quantum Siege. There you go. Forwards, backwards.
Hey everybody, we got quite a crowd here. So yeah, I'm one of the co-founders. We've been working on very hard on our next title, our first title as Armada Interactive, and we've grown quite a bit over the time. We're now like 25, a couple outsourced, so 30 people in total, and we've all been focusing on making this title the best we can. So I'll be giving a sort of high-level, very broad overview of the entire game, sort of the technology, also the art behind the game. But we're not going into much depth because we don't have time for that, else we'd be here for a very long time. So we'll be starting off with the technical part, some quick takeaways on that, and to the end we'll go into the more graphical and maybe the more fun part, because there's like pretty images at the end, so that's good stuff. So let's dive into depth. So this is, quickly explain, first of all, let's do a quick survey over here. How many people are working with Unity in this audience? Oh, that's a lot. That's good, because we're going to be talking about Unity optimizations and implementations here. Okay. So, Quantum Siege, real-time strategy game. We have single player and multiplayer, synchronous multiplayer. So, what we started off with building is we needed to make sure a couple of things actually. First of all, this game needs to be able to run perfectly in sync across all connected players. We need to be able to validate everything on the server, and it needs to be really fast and optimized. So. With the deal with strategy games is that because it's not a really very fast-paced action game, like fighting games, racing games, stuff like that, or shooting, we can actually get away with less fast input. So what you do is in our game you deploy units on the battlefield, and these units they get a little deployment timer. You sort of they materialize. And that sort of obfuscates that actually what you're doing doesn't actually need to be real time. So our game is actually using an MVC pattern, which is model view controller pattern for the programmers among you. We completely separated the logic from the visuals, and this allows us to run the game on the back end and front end on any device. Basically, it runs in the same way. So our simulation is deterministic, and our game actually only runs with an amazing 5 frames per second, and this is just our game logic runs at that speed. So visually, it just interpolates between the previous and the current state of the game. So as much as your device can take, it will look very smooth. Our game runs a lockstepping model, which means that basically as long as, let's take a step back here. If you take, for example, Age of Empires, like in the, well, what was it, olden days, that used to run like thousands of farmers and units of fighters and such stuff, a lot of stuff going on, and it was just running over like a 56K modem. So how they did that was basically they only sent the input of your player across to the other players, but locally there's just a simulation running, which is always exactly the same if you execute it in exactly the same frame steps. So as long as the inputs are the same, the outputs will be always exactly the same. So that's how they achieved that. So that's being used across, I think literally all real-time strategy games out there, which have a lot of units, a lot of things going on, and it's not actually valuable to sync the state of the entire battlefield all the time. So because we only require inputs to go into the simulation, we actually now can just gather all the inputs, send them to the backend. It runs as fast as it can through the entire gameplay session. A gameplay session takes 3 minutes in the game, but it can take like only a fraction of a second on the backend. And then it checks if you actually won or not, and then it gives you the rewards tied to that. So this is the conventional lockstepping method. You can see on frame 1, both players send input to each other. They actually send it to the backend, which just is acting as a relay, and it just fast forwards, or it sends the inputs to the other players, and they fast forward the simulation by 1 frame, and they keep doing this and keep doing this. This works very well unless one of the players is actually disconnected or has a lag spike, and that happens a lot when you're on a mobile device. So that's why we started off with this, and it didn't really work for us. So what we did is we made an alteration which we call server authoritative lockstepping. This basically means that the server has a fixed frame, sort of heartbeat, so to say, we send to the clients, and the clients don't need to send anything at all to the backend or to the other player. If nothing happens, they won't send anything. So it's super optimized as well. When a player actually sends an input, it's added to the buffer, which then sends it with the next frame update to all the players, which means you won't even feel if a player has a lag spike or even disconnects at all. So a player can just drop out, go back in, and you won't notice it yourself. So that's sort of the server side part. We have built quite some extensions for Unity. Among this is we had to build sort of our own level editor, as we sort of we have to serialize our data to a format which also can be executed on the back end. And so this basically all the Unity level editor stuff, we have sort of our own sort of copy version of that. Our level, all the assets in our level are made of entities. So it's all the entities in the level are just a class with an UID. That's it. You can add components to that, and a component can be anything for being like graphics, health, physics, entire AI brains, anything like that. So it's very easy to extend it, and it also allows us to sort of use the same thing as Unity's prefab system in here. Regarding prefabs, so this is going from one side to the other, so bear with me here. When we started off with the project and with the team 1.5 years ago, we immediately knew that we needed to have nested prefabs. This is a feature which Unity has sort of promised years ago, still hasn't implemented. So we built it ourselves, an extension on top of this, and it allows us to very easily create very deep hierarchies of customizable prefabs, which you can basically you alter one and the whole game changes its look. We also allow to expose certain properties throughout to the parent prefabs or profabs. So this is super usable to have, and I would highly suggest you also use a system likewise as this. I think on the app stores, there's also on the Unity Play Store, there's also some plugins which allow you to do this. Regarding to that, we've also built a flow editor. It allows you to very quickly iterate, create custom, basically UI flows throughout the game, and it's also representing your game visually. So if your game is super complex, you lose the sight on how your game is operating internally, where everything goes, it gets very complex. So let's take a very simple example here, how we build it. This is a reward screen. You can tap on these keys to see what's in there stuff, but we're not going in that. Let's take a very simple example. The X button at the top, you just attach a script to that. Simple stuff. You type there what is the event name you want this pop-up screen to trigger when you press that button. And in our flow system, the key info pop-up node in the center there has basically this graphic tied into there, and it just automatically, all the outputs are appearing based on what is actually in that node. So we have, in our nodes, we have behaviors, and those behaviors can be anything. So this spawns, for example, a game object, but you can also do, for example, checking if the connection is open, if your game center is being logged in, or anything like that. So it's highly versatile and quickly to expand. So let's take a look at our entire game. This is Quantum Siege, the whole game. Everything is right here. And if this graph gets really complex, there's lines going all over the place, it just means that your app is super complex. And unfortunately, with a lot of apps, this is just the case. It is just a very complex system. So that's why you really want this to be visual representation of that. On the left side, you can also see there's a whole bunch of layers, and we allow multiple layers be stacked on the top of each other. And basically, you can push layers on top, disable the interaction at the layers at the bottom, and when basically the main layer closes, the app closes. So then, basically, the game quits, except on iOS, because you're not allowed to do that. Because we're using a flow system, our game is just one scene, and we have a flow starter script on there where you can select which layer to start your game with, and that's it. There's no like additional scenes being loaded on the fly. It's all loading from prefabs, and everything is being driven through code. So this is a very, we think, a very organized way, and you don't clutter a whole bunch of stuff in your project. So this is working very well for us. So this is Quantum Siege. If you haven't seen it yet, then feast your eyes a little bit. We've been looking at trying to make this game looking as good as possible, but also as optimized as possible. And we've been running into quite some performance hiccups. So we've been analyzing the UI part, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's actually units you can deploy on the battlefield, and these units have a lot of different elements inside of it. So if you take our simplest unit, the blade over there, there's actually 7 images being drawn on top of each other, and there's a lot of overdraw there. But there's also of course, Unity batches some of them together if they're in the same atlas. But we have different items. For example, the unit card itself, the graphic, breaks the unit batching. We have the text breaks the unit batching. And then in total, I think we have like 20 cards because they're also laid on top of each other. And there's then we also have a grayscale version of those, which in total it means like there's 240 of these items being drawn there, which is super inefficient. So what we did is something simple, which is just we render all the units in the loading screen to a single render texture, and we basically allow drawing all of these things in one draw call, which saved us a huge amount of performance during gameplay. And that, if you see here at the bottom, we're actually going through all the draw calls of the UI. At the bottom, there's the units being drawn, and that's just one draw call for everything. So, memory optimizations, that's going to be a big thing for you if you, well, basically our lowest end device, our ARM 64-bit which basically means for iOS at least, it's it's 1 gig, so we have 512 max we can use. So we did, but to do quite some memory optimizations. I won't go into that part. So basically, I just want to give some takeaways that since Unity 5.3, they exposed the memory profiler, and this is a project from Unity itself. It's not in Unity, but you can download it. Highly suggest you do. It visually represents where the big memory chunks are and where you should optimize. Then Unity has a lot of great presentations from Unite 2016 about the whole Unity engine, how things work, how you should optimize, the do's and don'ts. Basically, you need, if you're a Unity developer and you want to optimize, you need to watch that. It's really good stuff. And there's also the best practices you should definitely watch. So now let's go a bit into the graphics, where it gets all interesting and nice. So basically on the left are the in-game models. The left is the lowest end device, and then we have the high end in the center, and on the right we have this unit inspector screen where you can see the unit in all its glory. Of course, these are all using the same shader, so now actually they side by side they look almost the same. But inside of the game, we also downscale the shader quality itself. And what you also can see here, well, at least the the amount of vertices in the LODs 2, which means the higher the LOD is, the less polygons it has. We're also using skinned meshes, so there's a lot of units going on at the screen at the same time. So you need to keep the vertex count low, because Unity, depending on your build target, uses CPU skinning and GPU skinning on some devices. So let's dive into the shader quality settings. We've built our own shader. This is the Uber shader. That's how Unity also calls it. Unity has their standard shader built in, but the standard shader is not that optimized actually. We've completely built it from scratch, and we added a lot of extra functionality on top of what Unity offers with the standard shader. And this allows us just to almost fully control, for example here, the blend modes, the culling modes, offsets. There's a lot of like alpha testing, everything. We expose that through here, so we only need one shader. Except it doesn't really mean that everything is being like one draw call, or there's just one shader in your project, because even though it acts as one shader, there's different permutations which are being generated on the fly in Unity, which actually they do exist as separate shaders on the device itself. So yeah, the lower the quality is, the more vertex lit we do, which is I think standard. So here you can see the difference between the lowest quality and the highest quality. And you can see, of course, this is just a shader, so not the models. The models are not getting a lower LOD over here. You can also see the emissiveness is actually turned off. There's no normals going on in this one. Because on the rocks on the background especially, you can see that the lighting just sort of flattens out completely. So we have a unit inspector where you can see the full model in all its glory and the high fidelity. So there we went all bananas and tried to get as much effects as well as post effects possible. We've added a nice bloom, real-time reflections and distortions, which you can use for heat effects, but also like this character Ghost becomes like a predator-like version. And here you can really see where the real-time reflections on the floor really shines. Here we're just using a second camera actually at the bottom, and we just do a vertical blur to make it like a sort of frosted glass-like effect. Works very nicely. In game, we also have post effects, except it's way more toned down. we have a blur and a tone mapping going on. So we have a lot of different things we can tweak with the blur effects, because we have a lot of different environments, we have different lighting setups. So something at night doesn't really work in daytime. So we made a highly customizable and effective bloom effect for that. The U shift is being displayed on the right. It's very hard to see, but the gate in the center actually becomes a bit more towards the purple, which resembles more the real-time lighting setup when you actually have bloom on the lens. So this is without post effects, and this is with post effects. You can see that it's very subtle, and subtlety we think is the key. Because if you, like 10 years ago, people were just blowing out the bloom to the max to make it next gen looking, but we really want to keep it very subtle. You can also see very nice, actually the background, it's not that apparent over there, but the water also gets a very nice sort of haze effect, like a subsurface scattering effect. And we've been hearing some very good comments about the water, so I want to show a little bit about the water we've created. So yeah, there's two frequency maps going on, high and low detail. We go through in the different directions, which is quite standard. But what we did is we have a different shader setup for close and far, as when it's close in real life, you can actually look down into the depth of the ocean and you can see the black void there, while in the distance we get the reflections and the shimmer to the water, so we get a more light effect on the background. We also can have real-time vertex displacement, so you can actually have the waves going up and down. And let's take just a few seconds to soak in this ocean. However, our game is not a jet ski racing game, so let's go back to where it's at. We've got 4 environments in our game, different lighting setups, and we've been spending a lot of time on making these look as good as we can. We're still going to work on them, making them more interesting, more different, and still achieving sort of the real life reflections going on, for example, on the rest of the units in the environment. So that's all I have to talk about. It was a lot. Thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions, me or my teammates over here will be glad to answer them for you. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the audience, perhaps?
Let's do the replica 1915, so not now.
Why?
There's people waiting to see that, and they haven't arrived.
So, if there are no more questions, then I think I'll just really briefly. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Apologies. Okay, sorry.
Well, for now it is iOS only, because we've been optimizing a lot to we want to make sure it runs really well on the entire supported range. And of course, you know, on Android there's thousands of devices out there, so we tested heavily on the complete device range for iOS. So that's why it's primarily now iOS, and we'll be announcing Android in the near future. When it's ready, yeah. In a couple of months. All right. Any further? No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, so what a day. So we started out with the basics of the market, where the strategy games are heading. I briefly walk you through how you can optimally prepare for your soft launch. Nick just held an amazing presentation about how you build a really good game. So for now, this would have been the seminar session. We would like to thank you for coming. And as a final stage, we would like to invite you back at 7 o'clock sharp, when there will be one more additional item that we would like to share with you. Thank you.
Okay, so hello stream. We are now closing it, and we are coming back in 50 minutes or so. Thank you for watching.